My personal experience of Canada was slim, but my impressions had been overwhelmingly positive. Canada seemed an enlightened country, home to an inspiringly multicultural Olympic team, a safe haven for refugees, and consistently top of the list of best places to live. It was a shock to hear that it had a problem with racism and violence against Indigenous women. Among the great many Canadian articles on the issue, there was one story that disturbed and puzzled me. In February 2014, Loretta Saunders, a 26-year-old Inuk student, had been attending university in Halifax, Nova Scotia. She had been working on a thesis on the reasons behind the disproportionately high number of missing and murdered Indigenous women when she herself was murdered. Studying photographs of Loretta's face, I struggled to understand how this attractive, intelligent young woman had become a target. Loretta was murdered by her roommates over rent money. As I continued to read up on the subject, I began to grasp the extent of the violence and its connection to poverty, historical racism, and marginalization. I learned that over the past few decades, hundreds of Indigenous women had been murdered or gone missing, and that many of their cases had not been solved. A few months later, in November 2014, there was more news from Winnipeg. A second Indigenous schoolgirl had been brutally attacked. This time, the girl survived, but her assault renewed calls for the federal government to do more to stem the violence. I started to plan a reporting trip to Winnipeg, feeling that the city encapsulated the issue with its large but segregated Indigenous population, its high number of missing and murdered women, and the very public failure of its police to protect Tina before her death. I began to negotiate with Winnipeg's Deputy Chief of Police, Danny Smith, for access to the homicide unit and its detectives. It was a delicate task that took nearly 3 months to organise, but by the end of January 2015, my colleagues and I were on a flight to the city. Our report, Red River Women, was published in April 2015 as a multimedia article and radio documentary. The reaction from the BBC's huge worldwide audience was one of shock and surprise, highlighting how little was known about the violence outside of Canada. The idea of writing a book about Tina Fontaine began to form in my mind, but I was conscious that without an arrest, it was a story with no conclusion. Then, in December 2015, the head of the Winnipeg Police Homicide Unit, Sergeant John O'Donovan, emailed to say that Raymond Cormier, a drifter and convicted felon, had been charged with Tina's murder. When I asked O'Donovan how much information he was prepared to give me about his investigation, he replied cryptically that he would only speak face-to-face. Taking a chance, I bought a ticket to Winnipeg, hoping he would open up. I was not disappointed. Over lunch on a snowy January day, the detective detailed the extraordinary lengths to which he and his team had gone to catch the man he firmly believed was responsible for killing the Indigenous teenager. It was at this point that I resolved to write a book that would tell Tina's story. 9 months later, I was interviewing Raymond Cormier in his prison cell. Afterwards, outside in my car, I remained chilled despite the warm September sun. The enormity of the project ahead of me was beginning to sink in. The afternoon before, I had been in Ottawa, interviewing Carolyn Bennett, then the Minister for Indigenous and Northern Affairs. She had told me that Tina Fontaine, a real person with a real family and real experiences that we as a country need to learn from, had given a face to the issue of missing and murdered women. Over the next year and a half, I continued to work on building up a picture of Tina's final weeks. But it wasn't until Raymond Cormier's trial in January 2018 that I fully understood many of the details. Even then, the picture was incomplete. We still don't know how Tina Fontaine died. The case against Cormier, described to me by O'Donovan as compelling and conclusive, proved to be circumstantial and weak. When Cormier was found not guilty, I felt my work needed to explore why the police investigation had taken the path it had. I wanted to understand the pressure officers were under to find a name and face to fit this crime, when so many other killings of Indigenous women and girls had gone unsolved. The story in this book is based on extensive face-to-face interviews, police notes, transcripts of recordings, and trial testimonies. I interviewed Tina's